Good evening, everyone.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to review the last halakha we did yesterday, and we'll continue from there. So this is the one, which was Zion. So we said a few things, right, in this halakha. First of all, we said, right, has to come from the strength of the man, koach adam. That's what it's called in Hebrew. So he brings a source for that. Where is this? Bet Yosef, he says, Per kol basar, right over there in Chulin, Kuv Zayin Amud Aleph. So what does it say there? Hi arita de delae en notlin mimenu le'adayim, right? So as we said, right, they had this kind of a duct that was drawing water from the river and carrying it over to the field to irrigate the field. This is what we were talking about. So it says the Gemara there that you shouldn't use this to wash your hands, this kind of duct. So first thing he says is that we don't wash our hands from there. So, and the second thing it says, also, we cannot dip our hands in there to purify the hands by dipping them into the water. So neither one of these things work. That's what we're saying, right? So again, right, he's reiterating, he says that the reason why we can't wash our hands from there doesn't come from the strength of a man. And also we don't dip our hands in there because it's drawn water. But he says, you know what? If he goes to the place where, in the duct, that place is coming from the strength of a man. In other words, there's some kind of a human intervention going on there, right? Drawing the water out of the river. So if you get close to that area where, that's going on, and you wash your hands from there, so that will work for you, So why is that? Because that's coming from the strength of a man. So in other words, we see from there that you need to have proximity, to the strength of the man. If it's too far away, it's already not his strength anymore. It's considered to be like already something else, It's like nullified already. right? It's already insignificant. But if you're close enough to the strength of the man, so then it does work. Okay. נותנים ממנו לידיים. ובזיע דבלה בכונס משקה, מלף לייפה ומטביל בו את הידיים. So then he says, right, that if there is a connection going, right, what kind of connection are we talking about? There's a stream of water flowing from the river into the duct. Okay? If that's the case, there's a steady stream going like that. So then it's telling you, right, that if you dip your hands into that place, into a duct like that, that will work for you. So why is that? I'll just explain to you, right? I think it's going to talk about it later also, but just to give you an explanation, right? The reason why that works is because since there is a stream of water connecting the river to the duct, so it's considered to be a part of the mikveh, because the river is a mikveh, and therefore, right, whatever is connected to the mikveh is also mikveh. So therefore it does work. So those are the three elements that we're dealing with here in this halakha. A little bit complicated, but we'll straighten it out. Everything is straight. Get everything straight. So that's the story. Rabbeinu tafas memra zu piske. So he says, right, but Yosef comments on this Gemara. He says the Tur here took these elements of this halakha, each one, one by one. In other words, each one is a separate element, which in itself it's like a halakha. You don't need all three of them together like in one shot. Right? Rashi. So he explains it like Rashi says, that's the way Rashi explains it too. That each element over here, right, each part of this halakha is a separate issue, not really connected to the other ones. Each one stands on its own, independent. Okay, so then he goes on. So says Tosfot regarding this halakha, this Gemara, right, in Nida Memtet Amud Aleph. Ahad deita hatam ketzat botkin keli cheres lida im nikav bekones mashke v'had aminan bepek kol habasar ebazia davla bekones mashke melaf laife lav haynu bekones mashke dehatam ayre שנקב כל כך גדול עד שהמים מקלחים והווה חיבור על ידי ניצוק וכונס משקה דאחר שיורד טיפ כדי אמינן בסמוך בניין אפשר דהאו כונס משקה הווה מדאחר דהתם נמי מייטה היי כונס משקה דאחר דאמר רבא כל שניקב בכונס משקה אין נותרים ממנו לידיים משמע דשבין אבל גב דלא הווה ניצוק בדברי מועט הווה חיבור לעניין סביטויות ידיים. So that's Tosfot. I didn't translate this because I want to give it to you like in one shot. So what he's saying here, Tosfot, is that as we said, right, you need to have a connection between the duct and the river by way of a stream of water, that's going from one to the other. So once you have that, it does work. It does connect them. It's considered to be connected. So therefore, when you dip your hands into the duct, you are also, in effect, dipping it into the river as well. So, right, he says, and then he goes on after this. He says, Rashi Kadam, and Rashi wrote, the Perkol Basar, right? Ibazia the Tavla Mashke. He explains, right, this Gemara that we just had in the beginning. So he says, if there's a hole, right, and it brings in a lot of water. It's like, pretty heavy amount of water. That's tzinor. So what happens is, right, that there's a stream going on, as we said, right, from one to the other. So it's just like streaming, there's a regular stream of water there going on from the duct to the river. So he says, since that water is like considered to be connected to the mikveh, right, which is the river here, even though, right, that the water in the duct, it doesn't have 40 se'ah there. Now, for the ones who are not familiar, what's 40 se'ah? So 40 se'ah is the minimal amount of water you need to have a kosher mikveh. That's what we're talking about. So he's telling you that even though you don't have that amount of water in the duct itself, but since it's connected to the river, which does have that amount of water and much more, of course, right? So therefore, it's kosher as is. So he says, therefore, right. So therefore, we are allowed to dip our hands into that duct now and purify our hands, right, to have our meal by way of dipping our hands in there. Okay. But he says, Rabbeinu Yerucham Katav, he wrote, Perush ve'im yesh be'arita arba'a se'ah, arba'im se'ah. He says just the opposite, right, of what we just said. He says the duct itself also needs to have 40 se'ah of water in there, which usually is not the case, right? In most cases. Well, I mean, if it's a large one, could be that it is, But if you're talking about a little dinky one, so then it's not going to be like that. So he says, if you have 40 se'ah of water in there, which is the size of the mikveh, as we said, then you can dip your hands in there and purify your hands. אפשר שתעמוד לכיוון דלא הווה אלא הניצוק חיבור לעניין תפילת הגוף, דהיינו אם הקלנו בו על עניין שלא יחשבו לשאובים, אבל מכל מקום צריך שיהיו בהם 40 se'ah, כאילו לא היו מחוברים למקווה. So right, interesting. So he says, the bit Yosef, he explains this a little bit, right? He says that the reason he says this rabbi, is because since when it comes to immersing the body, we can't use this duct, to immerse in there our body to be like a mikveh, even though it's connected by way of a stream. And what's the reason for that? The reason is because that duct itself doesn't have 40 se'ah. So you can't dip your body in there, and immerse your body, right? And and consider like a mikveh. But but what we said was before that if you do that with the hands, it's okay. The hands is good, but the whole body, no good, right? So says Bet Yosef, the reason why this rabbi says you can't even do your hands is because he says, since you can't do your body in there because you don't have 40 se'ah, you can't do your hands either. Okay, whatever. So it's not really considered to be a mikveh in every way when you don't have 40 se'ah of water in the duct. But it would seem to me that the halacha is not like this opinion. It seems like it's a minority opinion, no, single opinion. Okay, so that's that. Then he goes on, in Bet Yosef, right? So it tells you like this, right? Even though this connection to the river is not really considered to be a connection when it comes to immersing your body, as we said, but for your hands, it's good enough. כלומר, לעניין תפילה לכל גופו ניצוק אינו חיבור ועוד דהירו במקוואות כשופרת נדוד. So he says also, there's another thing, right? Which is that to have a connection between a mikveh and some other body of water, it has to be, right, that that connection is wide enough for like the opening of a skin bottle, It has to be that, at least that width. Which is a whole discussion by itself, by the way. How much is that in our times? Whatever. I'm not going to get into that now, but right. Anyway, the point is, right, you need to have that size to have a connection. So So he says, right, that then why is it good enough when it comes to your hands? Mishum de lav tvilah chamurahi. Because dipping your hands, he says, is not such a stringent, severe immersion like the whole body is. It's not the same level. So you don't need the same level of stringency there, to immerse just your hands. Right? Therefore, the rabbis were lenient with that. Right? Because after all, we said, right, washing your hands is really rabbinical. It's not from the Torah. So therefore, the rabbis are able to be lenient whenever they want to, whatever they see fit. So that's what they saw fit, to be lenient. So that's the way they made it. Okay, good. So then he says, right, Pirshu Rashi with Tosfot. That's how Rashi and Tosfot explain. In Chulin over there. The Rif Katab, what about the Rif, right? So Memra, he wrote this, right, lesson in a different place in the Talmud, in the Perek Elu Dvarim. Which is Mem Bet Amud Aleph, Vehu Gores Ebazia Davla בכונס משקה אין נוטלין ממנו ידיים, דלאו כלי הוא, כתב הראש, בפרק כל הבשר, דלגרסתו גם כן אין מטבילין בו, דלא חשיב לחיבור בכונס משקה, וכן נראה שהיה גורס הרמב"ם. So, but the Rif seems to be stringent over here, right? He says we can't wash our hands with this kind of connection. And then he goes on to say, but Yosef, that's what the Rambam seems to have also in his Gemara, So in other words, the Rif and the Rambam seem to agree here. He writes in the Laws of Blessings, Din arita velo katav she'im nikab bekones mashke matbilin bo, fapi shelo katav gam she'en notlin bo, ושניקב היינו לפי שסמך על מה שכתב כלים שנשברו ושבירה מטהרת אותם מידי טומאה, אין נוטלין מהם ידיים. So the Rambam seems to be stringent also, saying that you cannot wash your hands in a situation like that, where you have like you have a meager connection there, between these two things, right? Which is the river and the duct. It's not really a strong connection. So just to illustrate this for you, what kind of connection are we talking about here? So he says, right, that you have a hole there, which is the size that it takes to bring in liquids from the outside, which we talked about already, about the vessels. So you have the same kind of hole there, in this duct, whatever, right? Something like that. And that hole is not really so large, we're talking about maybe, a little pee-pee thing there, not really large. It's certainly not the size of a skin bottle, right? The opening of a skin bottle that we mentioned, that you need to connect to mikveh, right? So this is the reason why, this connection is really not so, it's not so significant. So therefore, right, it seems like we have a machloket here between Rashi and Tosfot on the one side, who are lenient about this, right? And then we have the Rif and the Rambam who are stringent and say you can't wash your hands in a case like this. In this, right, we're not even talking about washing, right? We're talking about dipping the hands. Okay, so let's go on a little bit. So he says, because he relied, so says this rabbi, Hagot Memoniot, Tehade Bainan Koach Adam, so is that which we require? The strength of a man. Nafkalan, right, regarding, as we said, right, washing your hands, you need the strength of a man. Nafkalan Medichtiv, where does it come out from this? It says in Bamidbar, right, in the Chumash, Yud Tet, 1919. Right, Ve'izah tahor debainan koach gavra. So you see from this verse right over there, what does it say there? That the pure person should sprinkle on the impure person. So we see right that you need a person to actually with his body, to sprinkle actively. So same thing over here, washing your hands, same idea. Okay, so it says katava ra'a, says the ra'a, ha de arita de dalai hanemile bedole shofech benoten noto charitz עצמו. Yeah, so אבל בנותן אותו חוץ לחריץ, הוא ממשיך אותו חריץ כשרים, so that's interesting, right, what he says here. He says that we said when it spills out of that gutter, right, that duct, the water, we said it's no good. Why? Because it's not coming from the strength of a man. But he says if you put the water right into the duct, and then the water can rolls, it flows like on the ground, after that, where it comes out of the duct. So that's considered to be kosher already, he says. Why? So he says, because when you have drawn water, right, and then you pulled it out more, right, it's kosher, according to everybody says. When it comes to washing your hands, right? When it comes to mikveh, we don't rely on this. But he says, when it comes to washing hands, we do. So let me try to explain to you what this means, right? Maybe you didn't catch this. Let's see if I caught it. I hope I caught it. So, right, so the point is like this, that when you, as we said, right, drawn water is not kosher for this purpose. What does that mean? Drawn water, to dip your hands into drawn water, no good. But what this rabbi is saying is that that's when you have drawn water like coming out of the river. But once it already like has moved, that water, into a different area, has flown over, right, streamed over, so then it becomes kosher, he says. Why is that? Because it's already not considered to be drawn anymore. Why not? Because it's already like in a different stage already, it's far from the drawing place of the drawing. It's distant from there. So okay, that's interesting. Very interesting. Wow. So according to my understanding of this statement over here, that would mean that if you like, let's say, we have like running water in the house, right? So we got a pipe. The pipe brings you the water into your home. So if that, in theory, right, if that pipe was open, okay, and you would dip your hands into the water there in the pipe, that would do the job, even though you're not pouring the water. But the point is that right, it's already been going a long time since it was drawn out of the reservoir, right, wherever it came from, that reservoir that it came from. That would be good for what? That would be good for washing your hands, dipping your hands, right? But it would not be good for immersion in the mikveh for your body. No good. So everything has its place over here, a lot of nuances with this halakha. That's why I wanted to review it, because yesterday we got mixed up with the, this the microphone thing went off. I don't know. The sound went off. I don't know what happened exactly. Okay, at least it didn't explode. We're lucky. You have to look at the bright side in life.
They did it again too,
All right.
with solar systems in some apartment buildings and some other.
Oh,
They
oh,
did
that's
a
very
second
interesting.
wave of, yeah, Lebanon is where they showed
All
the
right.
footage.
All right. Well, they they got a taste of their own medicine, That's good. Baruch Hashem, thank God. Okay, so anyway, right, let's go on. So it says Katav Ra'ah, says the Ra'ah, right? Who's the Ra'ah, by the way? You guys know who this guy is? Ra'ah. So this is Rabbi Aharon Halevi. That's his name. Right? Also one of the right Spanish guys, from Spain, if I'm not mistaken. He writes over there in Chulin, Aha de'arita de'delai ane mile bedule shoshofech benoten. I'm sorry, you read this already. Let's go on. Let's move on. ועמד ימינן ואם מקרב ידי גבל דבלה נותנים ידם ממנו כתב רבי יונה. So regarding what we said, right, that if you get close to the place where the water is being manipulated by a person, it's being pushed by a person, there it would be good, because it's close enough to that, strength of the man, coming from there, so that would be fine. כתב רבנו יונה פרק אלו דברים. So it says רבנו יונה regarding that, right? שרצה לומר שמשים ידיו קרוב למקום השפיכה. That he puts his hands, right, close to the place where it's pouring out, right, from the man. אף על פי שאינו משים ידם תחת השפיכה, ממש. Even though he says he's not really putting his hands under the spilling, like, the stream, directly under. We still can wash our hands from there. So he says, why? Because as long as they're close to the place of the spilling, they're still coming from the strength of a man. So it's good. So again, right, to reiterate that, what is he saying? He's telling you that it doesn't have to be right next to the guy, who's doing the pouring. It could be also close, not too far. That's also good. Okay, so that's what we say in Chulin, Ted Zayin Amud Aleph, Hashochet b'muchni, right? כאן בסביבה הראשונה, כאן בסביבה השנייה. וכן נראה מדברי הרש"י. That's also seems from Rashi. So he's bringing here a source for this, in the Gemara in Chulin. What does it say there, right? There's this famous Gemara there, which says that, if you are, 1 second, let me just read this again. Yeah. Right. So, the truth is there, it's talking about something else, it's talking about slaughter of animals, so what does the slaughter of animals have to do with washing your hands? What's the connection, right? So the connection is like this. Just like wash your hands has to be coming from the strength of a man, right? Could be a woman also. I'm not discriminating. I'm saying, don't start with me with the discrimination, right? What I'm saying is like this, that just like the water has to be coming from the strength of a man, also the shchita, the slaughter, also has to be like that. So what does that mean? The knife has to be pressed, cutting by strength of a person. Could be a woman. A woman could do shchita. They can slaughter also. Just don't slaughter your husbands. That's what I tell you not to do, right? As long as you don't do that, you're fine. Okay, so right, just like there, we require the strength of a man. Here also, same thing, right? That's a connection. So over there also teaches you one thing, right? That if it's close to the strength of the man, the knife, it's good, even though it's not, but if it's a little bit like it's already like a secondary strength, a secondary force of the man, it's no good, So when it's far off already from the strength of the man in terms of the distance or whatever, or the time, that's already not good, So same thing applies also here as well. That's what he's saying. Okay, so let's go to the Shulchan Aruch. Baruch Hashem, this time I think we got it pretty straight. It's good. Yeah. No more technical problems. You know, there's a Gemara, Masechet Megillah. You know what it says, right? Yagata matzata, lo yagata lo matzata. You know what that means? When it comes to Torah learning, if you really try, you will understand. The problem is when you don't try, so hard, and you're not kind of like lazy, you don't want to really try. So then don't expect to understand everything, you won't. So that's the thing. So, if you fell down the first time, right? If you, fell on your face, get back up and try it again. That's how you got to learn. Don't be scared, don't give up. You got to be a stubborn one, when it comes to learning, you got to be stubborn. But don't go too crazy, if you can't get it, after a few times, go on, you'll get it next time. Next time around. Right? It's okay. You'll survive. You'll live. You don't have to do it 1,000 times. You know what I mean? It's not necessary. But the general rule is, if you try, you will get it. And that's the way it goes in learning. So you got to be industrious. You got to be, eager to do the job. And don't give up. Okay, so let's see Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, so says Shulchan Aruch here. It's a long one. Right? So number one, right, there was like 3 elements over here. So we're going to go through each one again. This is like a nice review, for the whole thing, to sum it up. All right, so the first thing is it has to come from the strength of a man. So that means that somebody has to pour it on you, some human being has to pour the water on you. By the way, we're going to see later on also another thing which is connected to this, which is that somebody who his hands are not pure yet should not purify your hands, right? It's not allowed to do that. So that's why they say, in the halakha, we say that first wash your own hands and then wash somebody else's, because if you are not clean, you cannot make that person clean. Make sure you do yourself first, right? As I say, charity begins at home, so that's the same thing over here, start with yourself. So, as we said, right, you need the strength of a man. So therefore, he says, if you have, as we said, right, some kind of a duct, whatever, pipe, whatever it is, right, that is drawing water out of the river, the shofechbo, right, and then it's spilling it out. Right, and then what happens is that, right, it carries the water over to irrigate the field. So it says you cannot put your hands in there, as we said, right? To dip your hands in there, right? And expect your hands to be pure from the dip. So he says, so as we said, right, we have 2 things here. Number one is that if it's not coming from a man, right, so then it's a problem. So don't use that water to wash your hands, when it spills out of the duct, because it's already far away from the place where the man, the strength of the man was there. It's already far off there. I think I went a little bit ahead of myself here. Let me go back, right, and restate that. So the number one case is like this. You have the case where it's the water is being drawn out of the river into the duct, right? So there, what we say is that once the water is leaving the duct, like being pouring out of there, don't wash your hands over there because it's not coming from the strength of a man. מפני שאינם באים מכוח אדם, שכבר פסק כוח השופך, ואם משים מידיו בקרוב למקום משפיחה, but he says, if you go close to the place where, the pouring of the man is going from there, so there you can do it, you're close to him. So you got the strength of the man going on there. אף על פי שאינו משים אותה תחת השפיכה ממש, even though he doesn't place it right under the place where he spills it, like a little bit close to it, but not right there. It's still good, because when it's close, it's still considered to be his strength, right? That's the thing. So therefore, your washing is good. Because if you're still close, right, to the place of the spilling, so that's good enough, that's considered to be fine. By the way, we always want, like we think this way, this is our mentality. When we hear things like this, we say like, well, okay, so what's the distance? Like how far can you go? It doesn't really say that in halakha, how far you can go. It just says it's close or it's far, So whatever, do your best to to know what that is, Make a determination. Maybe we'll look in the Mishnah Berurah, to see if he has any ideas on that. But anyway, I'm just going to read through it first, and then we'll see there, right? So he says, but what about if he dipped his hands into the gutter, right, into that duct? So they're not good, right? It's no good. Because, as we said, right, it's not, the problem is that it's drawn water. So he says that's when he's right spilling into the gutter itself. But if he already left the gutter, right, and kept on moving, flowing afterwards, right, then you can dip your hands, as we said, right, because it's already not called drawn water anymore for the purposes of washing your hands. For the purposes of immersing the body, we said it's different, right? Don't learn one from the other. Don't compare this to that. Apples and oranges, right? Not the same thing. Okay, so let's go on. ואפילו דולה נותן דשאובים שהמשיכה כשרה, ואפילו דולה נותן מתוך החריץ עצמו את הדלי נקוב מאחוריו, right, בכונס משקה, right? So now, right, we're going to the last element of this halacha, the final element, which is, right, that we're saying if you have some kind of a connection between the river and the duct. So we said, right, what is the connection? There's a hole in the bucket that they're using, to draw the water out of there. And it's like the size that it takes to bring in water from the outside. So it's not really a big hole, but, it's kind of tiny. So it's not really big enough to be a connection for mikveh purposes. But anyway, right, since there is a connection like that, and that, that's the water is streaming right from there, there's a stream of water connecting the river to the duct. Maybe it's hard to picture this, I have to give you a video of this, maybe, we'll put it on YouTube, right, whatever, we can demonstrate to you, right, anyway, right, don't hold your breath on that one. Okay. Okay. I have to be a good producer to do something like that. I'm not so good at production. Okay, so anyway, right, so he says, because it's connected with that stream, it's considered to be like he dipped his hands into the river, which is a mikveh. וניצוק זה בחבר הכלי לאור בחשיב המים שבצינור מחוברים למי מאור. ואף אגב לניצוק כזה לא חשיב חיבור לעניין טבילה. So it says even though it's not going to be, this kind of connection is not good for immersion of the body, right? But when it comes to the hands, we're more lenient with that, as we said. Okay, so that's one opinion, right? Now it brings another opinion here, right? Which some argue with this and they say, right, that it's not even considered to be a connection when it comes to washing your hands. So apparently, right, we poskin like the first opinion, right? So we can be lenient with this. This is not really. These are not very common things for us. We don't do these kinds of things. But just as a practical thing, for us, right, for our practical purposes, what would this mean? Let's say, right, for instance, let's say you're out in the nature somewhere, right, in the country, and you don't have a sink there, to wash your hands, let's say, right, but you do have like a stream, or a river, something like that, right, or a lake, So what you'd be able to do is to dip your hands, into the river or into the lake or whatever, and that would be considered like your hands are pure. That would be like practical application, perhaps, something like that. We could have more practical applications, but there's no end to it. I don't want to keep you here all night. Right? That's like a little example. Same thing, by the way, we're going to see later on also. Obviously, right? Obviously, it's more so than this. That if you if you have a mikveh, somewhere, and you dip your hands in there, you are able to use that also for your hands. A mikveh. That does purify your hands, when you dip your hands in there. All the more so. Okay, so let's read the Rama. It says Rama here, אין ליטול ידיו מאותן אבנים מהקבועים לכותל. So he says, oh, interesting, right? It says Rama, a little bit different here, right? Something a little similar, but different. So he says, you shouldn't wash your hands from those stones which are embedded into the wall. So what he did was, right, he made like a little receptacle there in the wall, and a little spout. He says, don't wash your hands from there. So I'm assuming, right, the problem is because it's not coming from the strength of a man. Same idea, right? It's just like coming, let's say, from the rain or something, right? Rainwater. And it's just pouring out, into the wall and then coming out from the spout. So he says, but if that receptacle was a vessel originally, and then he connected it to the wall, so he says then we can use it. So it depends, right, on how this was built. If it just happens to be there's a receptacle there, because of the structure of the wall, that we shouldn't use. But if it was originally, right, a receptacle and he built it into the wall, he slammed it in there, right? There he says you can use it. So we have to see the reason for this, okay? Because it's not so apparent. So let's look at the Mishnah Berurah here. Let's see if he explains something. Mishnah Berurah explains it very nicely. So he says the problem is like this, that when you have a receptacle which is in the wall, that's not called a kli, it's not called a vessel, because it's part of the wall basically. But what we're saying is, that if it originally was a receptacle and then he he slammed it into the wall, right? He hammered it in there, God knows, whatever it was, right? That's fine, because it originally was a receptacle. But something which is just, in the wall, some kind of little little hole in there, right? And you're using that, to wash your hands. No good because it's not a kli. That's the problem. That's what the Mishnah Berurah says. That's why we can't use it. Okay, very interesting. That's one thing. Right. I also wanted to see the Mishnah Berurah for the beginning, because there was another piece there which was interesting. One second. Right. You know what I wanted to see? I wanted to see if he describes like what distance we're talking about. When we say it's far or it's close, right? What does that mean? How far? This is what I wanted to check. If he describes that. So let's see what he says about that. Doesn't say. Okay. Well, no such luck. All right. So we'll leave it to your judgment, right? We'll let you judge if it's close or far. I can't give you an exact distance. Sometimes the rabbis do that, they let you decide. But the truth is, sometimes when the halacha says things like this, which we're not sure, like what it is exactly, like how much, how to measure it. Sometimes the rabbis say, since we don't know how to measure this today, like we don't have a tradition for that, so we shouldn't be lenient, But here, I don't see anybody saying that. So I guess you could leave it up to your discretion, Why is that, by the way? Because it's only rabbinical, so we go lenient. When there's a doubt, we go lenient. So if you think it's close, go for it. If you think it's far, then leave it. That's about it, I guess. Okay, thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. Laila Tov, Chazak Baruch. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I was saying to my friend, maybe this is the right 10 Zionist plagues, are going on. 10. I don't know. It's 10 plagues going on, right? So today we have plague number 2. I'm not sure what's going to happen. We'll keep you informed.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
God bless.